I'm going to go with one final question for this section, and then we'll move on to the campaign update and the audience Q&A. So this is going to be a very quick question. So, part of what's going to take to pass CalCare, I think, is work within the state legislature. So the question is, what do you think it's going to actually take within the legislature to pass CalCare, and what are some ways that you plan on advocating for it? And, go ahead.
Yeah, it's a great question. Do we have the answer? No, I'm just kidding. We are working with the nurses on an answer to that. And, it's not easy. Look, the reality is that things of this nature, it's like Nelson Mandela said, it seems impossible until it's done. If you think about the civil rights movement, especially coming out of World War II, it took 20 years coming out of World War II to accomplish a lot of the goals that were set in motion in the late 40s, early 50s. We've been at this for at least 2 decades now. I know there's been bills introduced for many, many years. And so this is the latest iteration, but I hope is the last one. I do feel hopeful for a few reasons. One, our new colleagues. This is a big reason. I know that, not to talk about some stuff in the past, the reality is that, I know that some folks were happy when I helped the bill, and didn't have really enough votes. But part of what I said was that we have a whole new crop of folks coming in, and we do them, they're fantastic. And a lot of them are both publicly supported single payer. They did it on the campaign trail. They've done it since then. They did it in higher positions of service, whether they did it on city council, we got resolutions passed, and what have you. So we do have more numbers in order to support a policy bill. The other thing, and this is something that is going to require continued conversations with our leadership, with the speaker in place, is the policy aspect of it, and not getting it bogged down in the finances. And let me explain what that means. Last time I was required to introduce a financing bill. Literally 2 to 3 weeks before CalCare had to get through the Assembly. Where did all the attention go from the media and from everyone, and even from colleagues? Oh my God, look at that price. That's not the right order of doing a waiver like you're doing CalCare. I'm not saying that we shouldn't talk about the finances, but what that does is it distracts us from the policy. What we need first is what is the policy we believe? And my chief of staff, Ryan's here. We actually went to Washington, D.C. We met with folks in Secretary of Senator's shop and Health and Human Services, and that run the waiver program. And they told us, you don't have to have financing in the bill. You need a policy bill passed, okay? And so what we have to do is make it very clear you need a policy bill to move forward, get voted on, and after the policy bill gets passed, that's the legislative authority that gives the federal government the authority to handle then the waiver application for the administration. Then, and it makes complete sense if you kind of take a step back, we don't know how much we even need to get in resources until we know how much we're going to get from the federal government. They don't know how much we need until they see what the program's going to look like. It all makes sense. We pass a policy bill, we file for waivers, it gets to the federal government, they complete that application process, come back to us and say, okay, California, these are all the waivers of all the federal programs, this is how much, it'll be hundreds, 100, 200 billion, it'll be a lot of money. And then we have money from the state, more than ever, because we supported expanding Medi-Cal, for example, undocumented residents. The right thing to do. Well, that costs billions and billions of dollars. What does that mean? That's less money we're going to have to find somewhere else, and we're already putting that money into our public health system. So we take all the state and federal money, that's most of the money we need. But because we're not going to have co-pays and premiums, we're not going to ask employers or individuals for money, we do have to find some mechanism to get the financing for the rest of it. But I mention all this because because last time I think that really caused a lot of issues in trying to get enough colleagues on board, quite frankly. And when I've talked to colleagues since then, even those that are on the fence that weren't necessarily prepared to vote for it, they're in a much better place now to understand the process of passing the policy. And so that being said, I think that we're in a pretty good place coming back in January of getting a policy bill through that focuses on the policy. In the policy bill, it says, well, the act doesn't go into effect until the funding's figured out. So it's not like you pass the policy, now we're stuck with it. No, now we have to do the hard work of getting the funding done. And eventually we're gonna have to go to the voters, because if we don't, the industry's gonna go to the voters anyway. And so that's where we're gonna have to have a room like this, but 10 times the people, right? To combat the hundreds of millions the industry's gonna spend to combat it. So I feel, you can tell like I have a lot of stuff in my head about how we move forward, but I do believe that we do have the right people in the legislature, the right assembly members. I believe we have enough support from the Senate, and I think that with new leadership now, there's an opportunity for us to have a fresh conversation on how we get a policy through the assembly. And then, obviously we have to continue to work to get it through the Senate, but I believe that we can get it to the governor's desk this year if we're organized, if we continue to do what we're doing in terms of reaching out to our community, and we make it very clear that the process we're following is not to ignore finances, is to actually respect the process that deals with finances in a responsible way. And that's going to be really important for us to have that kind of global conversation.
Thank you. Well, I agree and echo what my colleague has said. But I also believe that it is the voices of people and folks in this room that put pressure on their legislators. Not only those, actually, this is the leadership of the Progressive Caucus. And so it's not only on just the progressive members to move it forward, but it's on every Democrat, regardless of what spectrum they fall in, regardless of where their district is, for residents of their community, their constituents, to put pressure on those Democrats that maybe just need a little bit more understanding, need to hear from their constituents of the importance of this policy, so that when we have the conversations with our colleagues, we can also say, like, I know that you've been getting calls from your constituents. Your constituents are the ones that are asking for this. It's not just us. This isn't a pipe dream. Right? This is a real thing that the people of California are demanding, are needing, and is important. And again, it goes to the conversation about when we work on issues related to single payer, we also need to work on the healthcare workforce. So I'm just really grateful and thankful to CNA and all the work that you've been doing to push this forward, but also really thankful that in that same conversation, working with CNA through the budget process, we were able to allocate $10 million for the Song Brown program to create and have an opportunity for more individuals to become nurses in the state of California, which is also an important. There's a lot of well-intentioned policies that move forward, but currently there is a bill that both Assemblymember Kalra and I did not support that actually, unfortunately, delays the implementation of single payer in California. So part of that is having those very honest, real conversations that are sometimes uncomfortable, which is why SB 770 is not the direction that we should be going in. This is a tough conversation even with our labor partners that are supporting the policy and understanding we have been working on the process of getting single payer reintroduced in January of 2024, if not as early as December of 2023 this year, because we have worked on a lot of the policies and issues already in that bill, and we don't need to create the policy again when we haven't really done it. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. So part of that is the very hard, real conversations amongst our colleagues in both houses, with our partners, with coalition building to ensure that we're moving in the right direction, that moves forward a single payer policy that becomes a reality versus delayed implementation. And if we are able to do federal waivers on other programs, like I explained earlier with my own bill 712 on hot fresh foods for EBT card members, then we can also get a federal waiver to get the federal government to ensure that we have the money, dollar amount needed to make single payer a reality in California.
And I agree with my colleague, Mr. Kalra, that last year those conversations, when we were fighting extremely hard to get CalCare done, became a lot more difficult when that conversation about funding came. That conversation about funding, much more complicated our conversations in our first kind of struggle in the healthcare committee. I remember going right before, hours before that meeting, and if you remember, we weren't sure we had to vote. We were spending hours and hours and hours talking to people about this policy piece. The conversation about revenue enhancements was a difficult conversation to have. It did, and the ads that came from private industry that suggested that we were going to tax everybody over and over and over and over, that they would pay a lot more, were driven because of that policy, because of that revenue conversation. Here's what happens this year. If we don't have to have a revenue conversation, we can now pass the policy conversation. And I do agree that there are a lot more of our colleagues today that are open to that conversation about getting single payer done, because there isn't a conversation about revenue. But here's the other thing that I would say too. Here's what's been incredibly helpful in getting this bill through last year in the hours of conversations we've had with people. One is understanding the facts. Two is having those relationships with members where you can have an honest conversation. The other is understanding when people have concerns and questions. Like, I'm not gonna say names, but there were people who I sat with for hours who weren't sure whether they were gonna vote until they went up to health committee. But every time they had a question, every time they had a concern, every time that they thought that there was some reason that they should vote for it, we answered that question. We spent enormous amounts of time making sure that people felt comfortable with the policy. And I think it's going to take some of that too. I do agree that organizing people's districts and having conversations with people in their communities, trusted messengers, is going to be incredibly important. But I will say that if the legislator does not come on board right away, it's important to talk to them again and again and again in a respectful manner, so that we can bring them on board. One of the things we don't want to happen is that people are not comfortable with the approach and they just don't come with us. And I think in the first committee, when we went through there, making people feel comfortable about the approach, but making them feel comfortable about the policy pieces was what helped us to drive success there. And I think that's something that can be duplicated, and I think that we're capable of doing that. Thank you.